All right, welcome back to the beautiful Pacific Northwest, the land of plaid and coffee, and PacWest Bigfoot. This is David, and real quick, I am going through and updating some of the older encounter stories here on the YouTube channel. I'm also putting these into a podcast format as well. You don't have to worry about getting over there and checking it out on the podcast if you don't want. That's okay. I'll be sharing them on the Facebook page though. Here's the other deal. The reason I'm actually updating these is because some people were a little bit irritated with the scratchiness in my throat and all that stuff. And that's okay. I don't blame you. You love your encounter stories. And what I want to do is give you the best possible reading of these different encounter stories that come to me. Also, real quick, I do and will say this. I will never apologize for this, however. Sipping on that old Sasquatch coffee. Yeah, that will never happen here. So, let's get on with this week's. And don't forget, next week I will have a brand new encounter story out here for you. And also, one more update I almost forgot about. I've got a lot of stories that come to me, a lot of these reports and things like that come to me, and it's hard for me to kind of keep up and turn them into these awesome campfire-like stories for you. But even the real reports that you send to me, I'm going to start taking some of those, edit them up as quickly as I possibly can, and have them for at least have them available to read on the blog over at PacWestBigfoot.com. So you'll be able to find some of those there. I just got a couple in this week that I will be putting out here over the next week or two. Okay, so those will be there for you. But let's get on with this updated version of Shadowed by a Bigfoot near Yacolt. I thought I was a dead woman. I was shadowed by a Bigfoot near Yacolt, Washington, and I seriously thought I was a dead man, or a dead woman in my case. I was out that late afternoon to clear my mind and at the same time to get some painting done. I was somewhat still new to the Yacolt area at the time. I heard the stories of Bigfoot growing up in the Napa Valley. Everyone in Northern California has, but I never thought they were real until that day in 1992, that I saw one near a river where I lived. Here's my encounter story, Dave. From wine country to back country. I am an artist. I have loved painting ever since I was a child growing up in the Napa Valley. Actually, Calistoga, California to be exact. Eventually I narrowed down that passion for painting to watercolor. And yes, this has to do with my Bigfoot sighting. Well, sort of sighting. I wanted to move, simply put, because I wanted to live somewhere else. Not too far away from home, but far enough away to feel far enough away, if you get what I'm saying. I just wanted to move away from home is all. Yacolt is still a small town, but it has a huge story. The whole area actually does, and unfortunately, not all of it is that comfortable, especially when you are confronted with it. I have since read some books like Haunted Valley and such for some insight into this area and its history with Bigfoot. I was amazed at all the history about this Bigfoot thing here, especially when it comes to the native contact and, well, interaction, for the lack of a better word, with them. Mostly, however, I was amazed by the beauty of this place. And just so you know, part of the experience I had that day was part of or all of the straw that broke the camel's back, if you will, of why I moved back to Napa a few months later. I wanted to paint up near the Bells Mountain Trailhead area, by the Lewis River just outside of town a ways. There was a trail, a waterfall, and, if I wanted, there was a large pool of water downstream, a bit that was beautiful during the early spring. This time of year, all kinds of flowering plants, bushes, and trees, for that matter, were coming back to life, and I wanted to catch that in a painting. That day I would opt for the larger pools of water downstream where it was quieter. There were relatively no people, and the sun was out. Well, for the most part, that made the green water better reflect the trees and foliage for a beautiful scene. Trail scents and loneliness. I would head out in the late afternoon. Everyone knows who has been there that the sun is best in the latter part of the day instead of early morning. Well, if you're into photography or painting, that is. Besides, my soon-to-be ex-fiancé would be back that night, and I did not want to be home when he returned, at least not at that moment that he would arrive. We were on the outs. Well, I was. He was just not aware of what I knew he did at that point. The painting would be a great way to calm down, gain some perspective, get past the anger, and figure out what I wanted to say, and how I would say it when I returned later that evening. It was sad. It was just a sad situation. And on top of that, I was really hurt and angry. But enough of the personal issues at the time. I just wanted to let you know some of the why I was out and about that late afternoon. I wanted to be alone that afternoon, and being mostly a sunny day that day, there were going to be some people up and down the main trail from the trailhead to the waterfall. That is why I chose downstream. I only noticed an older couple heading back up the trail. They did stop me and warn me that there was a possible black bear down near the area where I would be. They said they could hear it moving about, probably eating some of the early berries and whatnot. Being spring, it could be a female. So a female bear with cubs could be an issue if you do not pay attention, even the smaller black bear species. But I was not all that worried about mama bears at the moment. My mind was elsewhere, and I just wanted to paint it all out. I had everything I needed with me, a small radio, my easel, my paints, brushes, and creation as my subject. I also brought some snacks, a couple of sweets I love, and I remember not taking them out for a while just in case there was a hungry mama bear out and about. After a short walk, I made it to the pool, as I like to call it. And I was right. At that time of the day, the sunlight created a nice reflection of the trees and nature in general upon the water. I got everything set up, and even the radio station I love came in rather clearly for being a ways out and in a bit of a canyon-like area. I started painting, and it wasn't 15 minutes into it that a splash wrecked my perfect reflection of the sky and trees on the water. Rocks and tree breaks. I could not tell which way it came from at first, the other side of the river? My side? I was not sure because I did not see it coming, but it was a decent-sized rock to be sure. While I was a little irritated, I thought at first, like anyone else, that it was some person, a jerk more like it, interrupting my afternoon. Trust me, I was in plain view of everything. Anyone could see me along that part of the bank. I calmed down a bit, decided to take a sip of water. That is when I almost spit it out through my nose as yet another rock came flying from the trees and splashing into the water. However, this came from over my head, behind me. I was not frightened as much as I was kind of mad. Okay, really mad. I turned and faced the thick forest behind me and yelled. Hopefully, that would take care of them, or at least let them know that I was mad and present. I stood there, still staring into the trees. I saw no movement, but then again, an elephant could move through there, and I could probably not see it at that time of the day. Either way, I decided to get back to painting now that the water was still again, and I said my piece to the tosser of the rocks. All was quiet for about 30 more minutes, and that is when I heard what sounded like trees breaking or being snapped, I guess. Snap! Snap! It was a clean break, you could tell, and I could tell it was a rather thick limb, too. I immediately turned my head to look behind me, but once again, no movement came from the forest at all. As a matter of fact, the noise of birds was absent at that time as well. That is when that creepy feeling started to come over me. I felt as though I was being watched, and I was. I kept standing there, I remember. I was leaning forward a bit, trying to listen and look into the woods for anything at all, any movement or sound. Then, all of a sudden, I heard yet another tree break. The sound was close, probably within 40 yards of where I was standing at the moment, and just a bit to my left. It was It was a loud snap, and then I could hear the limb hit the ground, as it was apparently tossed in the opposite direction the snapping came from. Not far, but opposite of it. Movement. And I mean me. What in the world, who in the world throws rocks that far and breaks off what sounds like large limbs on a tree out here? I may be from Napa, but know this, I am not ignorant of wildlife, and especially what lives in the Pacific Northwest. Well, at least I thought I knew everything that was out here. I still could not see any movement, so I decided I needed to remove myself from the situation. Besides, I was getting really bad and creepy feeling still, and it was growing into fear for some reason. I got everything together and started off for the 15 to 20 minute walk back to the car. Hopefully, whatever it was would leave me be now that I was picking up and heading out of the area. Well, that was the hope at least. Just as I started up the trail, I heard movement. At that movement, I knew why I was feeling frightened. Whatever it was huge. It had to be. I could hear the footfall, and I could hear it as it moved through the thick brush and about 40 yards away or so. It was close, and it was coming closer. I then picked up the pace. I did not even get 20 feet up the path when I noticed some movement out of the corner of my eye. Well, not really the corner, more or less, just southeast of the trail in front of me. When you realize you're in a situation you are not sure you'll live through, panic can set in, and that is when you can become your own worst enemy. That was something my dad taught me. He was a physician and a medic in the army, too. The best thing you could do at that point, he said, was to keep a level head and look for a way out, or a way to reverse the situation into your favor. The shadow of a body stepped out near the path about 30 yards or so ahead of me, and I gasped. To get past it, I would have to walk practically right up to it. Not happening, I thought. Not with what this thing looked like. Before I continued, though, I have to say, this thing was at least a few heads taller than my soon-to-be ex-fiancé, and he was nearly 6'4", a very tall guy. I could not make out a face or what it looked like exactly. The only reference I had at that moment was Bigfoot. The thought alone sent a shiver up my spine. It was getting darker, and here I was, not a soul around, except for some animal or creature that was big enough it looked to eat me in one bite. Snap! I watched it as it reached up with its left long arm, grabbed a branch, and snapped it off. It then threw it towards me. I knew now this was a Bigfoot. I could not believe it, but it was. And I knew that I was going to have to do what Dad said. Find a new way out, and fast. This thing looked as though it was not going to move anytime soon. There was only one way, across the river. It was not all that swift here, but it was much more shallow than downstream and upstream around the bend. I looked back over my shoulder, and it looked as though that creature moved closer to me, but was shrouded in darker shadows, as if it was back further in the trees, but closer to me trail-wise. I tightened the strap on my backpack, I held my easel above my head, and waded into the water. The only thing I could not take was my radio. I had to leave it behind. Better the radio than my life, for sure. This time of year, however, snow remained on the mountains, and it was slowly melting and flowing down into the rivers and creeks around here. So the water bit me like a dog on a postman. I had to make this crossing fast. 5 minutes in there, and I would probably have died from hypothermia either way. I got to nearly my waist when I heard crashing through the woods, but this time it was the Bigfoot creature moving past me, heading downriver, I suppose. I got out of the water, and quick. Then I started running back up the trail. It was almost all but blocking moments before. I would not have to risk the frigid water after all, although I was now cold, very wet, and scared. By the time I reached the car, I was tired, but still in panic mode and with a whole bunch of fear mixed in. It was practically dark at this point, and there was not a car or a soul around, just me and some huge monster of the woods, apparently. I started the car and was off, peeling out of the dirt as I left. Ex-fiancé and Napa bound. I remember not having that big blowout argument with my ex-fiancé. Life was a little different after that encounter near the river. However, we did split up, obviously, and I soon moved back home to Napa Valley. Not to Calistoga, but pretty close. I have to admit, I still have nightmares about the incident from time to time, and even though it did not totally wreck me for the outdoors and painting it all out, as they say, I rarely go alone, and if I do, it is usually close to home. And just so you know, I'm thinking about painting what I could see that early evening by the river outside of Yacolt, Washington. I'll let you know when I do, and if I do, Dave. Thank you. Malia.